Hi, everyone. This is going to be a series entitled, Is It Possible That Paul Was an Herodian Infiltrator? This is going to be part one. And I saw this book. It was called Infiltration, The Plot to Destroy the Church from Within. This is a book by a Catholic author. And I'll explain why this caught my eye. And I was wondering, I wonder if he's going to pick up on the idea that Paul's an Herodian and then bring that into play in discussion. So let me just explain that to you. This is the author, Dr. Taylor Marshall, The Plot to Destroy the Church from Within. This is definitely from a Catholic perspective, and he is claiming that basically certain leaders have come into the church with new principles that are not really Christian at all, and he's claiming that's an infiltration from within, and it may very well be. I've not read his book, but all I'm saying is what I was thinking is, was he thinking about Paul being an infiltrator? Because I actually first found this work. He had done the work, the Catholic perspective of Paul. And then I wondered what that's about. And then he did an article that said, was St. Paul related to Herod? 7 reasons Paul was an Herodian. So he actually proved to his satisfaction in 2015 that that was so. And then this book was written in 2019. So I went and ordered it so I could see, is he actually going to make an argument within Catholicism that Paul is an infiltrator? And the answer is no. So I did a word search on the word Herod, and there were 0 matches found. So I'm going to rule that out as what he was doing. But I just want to show you how I got into this topic a little bit more deeply. This is a great article for the proposition that Paul was an Herodian. He shows you 7 proofs that that's the case. And 2 of them are the same I've had about the passage in Acts 13, verse 1, and the passage in Romans 16:13, where Paul salutes his relative, his kinsman named Herodian, which means little Herod. Anyway, so this is a little bit of his article here. I just want to show you a little bit. And but we're going to address that in a later part. But we're going to do something first. We're going to look at a book that I've read some of it some time ago. It's not fresh in my memory as of today, but I did a lot of note taking on it, and you'll see that in a second. It's called Operation Messiah. And the subtitle is St. Paul, Roman Intelligence, and the Birth of Christianity. The authors are Tiz Voskolin, excuse me, sir, if I didn't pronounce that right, and Rosemary Sheldon. And let me tell you a little bit about this book, because we're going to go through a couple of few pages of it in this part, and maybe it's going to require a second part. All right. Now, I asked this question for the audience. Would infiltration's goal be to keep the majority of Jews from ever becoming followers of King Jesus? So if he's serving the Herodians, if Paul's serving the Herodians, Herod's family had divided up. There was originally King Herod the Great. He dies in 4 BC. His family takes over. Herod Tetrarch, also known as Herod Antipas, he becomes the king ruler over the area where Jesus lived. That was Galilee and Perea. And therefore, he's very antithetical to Jesus, because Jesus could be deemed a king and be accepted by the people there. And if those people in Galilee are mostly Jewish, then the threat is that Jesus could be accepted by the Jews. And then how would you infiltrate a Jewish culture to try to corrupt it so they will not accept Jesus, ultimately to accept him as their king? If you could instill a doctrine in them, what would that be? And if it was accepted as authority among Christians in its writings, that this feature or aspect of Jesus is true, and I'm going to show you what it is, the Jesus being cursed, is I'm going to give you a preview. That statement by Paul, it would be exactly the kind of thing the Jewish people would, if the Jewish people, if the Christians are saying their Messiah was cursed, well, by definition, he can't be Messiah, and you'll see that in a minute. So that is actually an excellent proof of why Paul is a subterfuge, because why would he say that? It's unnecessary. It's not anything messianic at all. And it can't be. Once he's cursed, he's cursed. That doesn't mean he bears our curses. He's cursed. He has to go to hell forever. And that's it. So that didn't make any sense, and except for purposes of proving Jesus it proves that Paul was a infiltrator, sabotaging Jewish people, accepting it if an authoritative voice could stand up within the midst of the Gentiles, let's say, because he can't stand up in front of the Jewish leaders, But he could try to say, I have my realm over here in the Gentiles, and start writing stuff, and they'll get back to the Jews that basically Jesus is cursed, and therefore he can't be saved, and he can't save anybody, but because he himself has been cursed. It's not an atonement anymore. He has a curse on him. And we'll see that Paul clearly says that in a second. So I call this the tactic of the poison pill. It's injected using Gentiles under Herodian influence. So if you can gain a hold of the Gentiles and take advantage of their ignorance of Scripture, but get them to say, oh, yeah, Jesus is a curse for us. Somehow that's a good thing. No, that's a bad thing for Jesus being Messiah. But we being dumb Gentiles don't know that. But the Jews would know it. We could proclaim it all day long and not realize how foolish that is. Okay, now, let me tell you something about population studies that is important to make this point more clear. Okay, so I'm telling you all this again just to give you what is the strategy of being an infiltrator and saying the things Paul says. And it's important that actually Gentiles are the minority in Judea, and that Paul has to gain credibility amongst Gentiles outside of Israel, and that use that to then contaminate the information about what people think Christianity is about to make them think it's what Paul's teaching and not what Jesus taught. So let's take a look at this. This shows you the majority of people in Galilee are Gentile. There is a myth that was created by Gentile people to think that most of the people in the area where Jesus was living were Gentile, therefore he would be favorable to them, and for whatever reason, their motivation, their bias, who knows why, but it has no evidence to support it. So here's Mark Cheney in the Department of Religious Studies, Southern Methodist University, February 2003, in an article called "The Myth of a Gentile Galilee." And he just says a perusal of articles on Galilean Bible dictionaries, encyclopedia reveals that the belief that Galilee's population at the time of Jesus included a large number of Gentiles, perhaps even a majority, is common. So you read it in encyclopedias, and he goes and tests it, and he finds it's false. This view is certainly not universal, as an examination of the writings of scholars like Shawn Brasseaux, Eric Myers, and E.P. Sanders shows. It is, however, widespread, and one frequently encounters it in works on the historical Jesus or in studies that assign a Galilean provenance to Q. And that Q means the original manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew. And all the Gospels, all the synoptics. What is less frequently acknowledged, however, is just how little data there is to support such a claim. The overwhelming majority of our literary and archaeological evidence suggests just the opposite. Galilee's population was predominantly Jewish, with Gentiles forming a small and relatively uninfluential minority. I'm going to pause there. So the strategy of a Herodian is, he knows he's got the Gentiles on his side because why? Because Herod is mostly Gentile. He's been appointed by the Romans. He claims some Jewish heritage in his background, but predominantly he's not worried about the Gentiles not siding with him and being disruptive. He's worried about the Jews, okay? And they want to get rid of Herod wants to get rid of the Jewish law. Pontius Pilate is on record in Josephus saying, I want to get rid of all the Jewish law. That's what needs to be done. But how are we going to do that with you can't win over the Jews to get rid of their law. You have to use some pressure. What if you created a Christian movement within Christianity, which would split it on the idea of law versus non-law? And that's exactly the strategy they're going to take. And also, you have to inject certain things that would repulse Jews from ever accepting Jesus as their Messiah, because they Herodians don't want the Jews to defect from Herod being their king to now accepting Jesus as their king, whether spiritual or whatever. They don't care. Herod doesn't want any rival. Herod Antipas in this situation, the king tetrarch of Galilee and Perea. So let me just finish it here. In this essay, I'll outline the currently available evidence, summarizing some of the findings of my book, The Myth of a Gentile Galilee, so the Society of New Testament Studies Monograph Series 118, Cambridge University Press, 2002. So he got published by a high-quality publisher, so that he must have been vetted very well. I'm going to just give you a little bit more of what he says here. I'm not going to read all of this, but he'll tell you if you go to the city of Sepphoris, and that's a city that Herod the Tetrarch in Antipas in 4 BCE, that's after his father died, Herod the Great. He was a client king appointed by the Romans to rule Galilee and Perea. Antipas renamed the city Odocratis, the city of Sepphoris, probably to honor the Roman emperor, etc., etc. It was one of the biggest towns in Galilee. There were 8 to 12,000 inhabitants. It was the administrative capital. It was 4 miles from Nazareth. What about this city? Many have claimed that the Greeks, Romans, and other pagans played a substantial role, but however, the actual evidence is to the contrary. For Gentiles of the first century in Sepphoris is extremely limited. However, there are no first century inscriptions that record vows, offerings, or dedications to deities, no grave inscriptions that identify the backgrounds of the interred. I mean, come on. That tells you there's no Gentiles there. They use all kinds of markings for their dead. No figurines or other cultic objects have been found in the first century context, save one bronze plaque depicting a winged figure. The exact function of this plaque is unknown. There was no sign of a pagan temple dedicated to a local deity, an Olympic god, or the emperor. Okay, so basically, the evidence proves that Paul's going to have no way to intrude on this culture. He's not going to be able to turn the Jews in Judea over to Herod's to accept Herod as king, but they can do something to poison the pill that they would ever think Jesus is their king. And if they can keep their loyalty still with Herod, at least their nominal loyalty, that's satisfactory. And I'm going to show you how Operation Messiah hit right on the nail in one of the very first points. I'm going to read you this next time. Birgitta Hoffman just explains that it's overdue to do this kind of analysis using tactical strategy of military governments that use basically infiltrators. And but we should know that the co-author, Colonel Rosemary Sheldon, is the head of the Department of History at the Virginia Military Institute. She received her PhD in ancient history from the University of Michigan. Her dissertation on Roman intelligence gathering won a National Intelligence Book Award. She's on the editorial boards of the International Journal of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, the Journal of Military History, and Small Wars and Insurgencies. So she's the co-author of this book. So we're reading her analysis mixed in with Tis Volskuken, who received a master's in history and journalism from the University of Groningen, Netherlands, and it's so on and so forth. We'll get to this next time. Now, I just want to put on record, when I wrote on this in 2014, I said, I do not believe Paul was a spy for Rome. I am definitely changing my view. I definitely believe that is a more likely than anything else. That explains everything. And you'll see why, particularly the one we're going to look at here. This Jesus is a curse would never have crossed anyone's mind who was a rabbinic Jew or a Pharisee or anything. It's a solely a Herodian principle put in there to contaminate Jews reading that and thinking, if that's a Christian document, these people are lost. They're following a false Messiah. And we'll get to that in a minute here. So I tell the story. We'll get to this next time over here. These passages are about how the co-author in doing his master's asked help from Colonel Sheldon, and she did help him, and she did agree in the end that what your principal argument is, that Paul was an infiltrator, is correct. And we'll get into that. So anyway, I after I did that, where I said I didn't believe it at the time, after that I did work on reading this book, and I got the book and I started reading it, and I put my notes in the back of the book. And I'm not going to go through each and every one of the notes, but I always asterisk notes. And so I asterisk page 44. And we're going to look at the comment there. Next time, we'll maybe look at 58. And after that, 65, 69, 70, 77, 79, 84, 93. Because I think this is very important. What was the purpose of Paul, Herodian, trying to get into the Christian religion? What was the goal? And did he succeed? And we'll see if he did. All right, so let's take a look here. So page 44. This is from the Operation Messiah. Those who argue for a rabbinic background believe Saul used the techniques he learned as a Pharisee to demonstrate the truth of his new religious experience. But what they do not comprehend is that Saul uses midrashic technique to drive a wedge between faith and Torah, a distinction which would never have occurred to a Pharisee. The passage in Deuteronomy that Saul quotes in Galatians would demonstrate the converse of what Saul claims, that Jesus is a curse. Anyone who's hung from a tree is cursed. Okay, and Jesus wasn't actually hung from a tree. He was nailed to a cross. But anyway, so he's saying the passage in Deuteronomy that Saul quotes in Galatians would demonstrate the converse of what Saul claims, that those who live by the Torah will be blessed and those who break it will be cursed. So in other words, if Jesus is a curse, becomes a curse for us, then he is deemed a lawbreaker. There is no atonement for him. I mean, he needs atonement still. He's now been cursed. that doesn't put him in a position of being forgiven by God. That means he's cursed forever, and he has to stay in hell forever because he's cursed. So this is why he's pointing out this cannot be, and he'll point it out himself. This cannot be accepted by Jews. This will cause them to be repelled from Christ, not to accept him. And let's take a look. Saul uses Christ's death on the cross to argue for an entirely new conclusion, namely that Christ's death removes the curses of the law. In other words, Paul's trying to argue that since Jesus became our curse for us, now the curses of the law on lawbreakers no longer applies to us lawbreakers. So Jesus has that curse, which where does that leave Jesus? It doesn't leave him in heaven, friends. It leaves him in hell. But I digress. And brings the blessings of faith to the Gentiles. This suggests that Saul is not really making up this exegesis. Rather, he is countering a Jewish criticism of Christianity, namely that Jesus cannot be the Messiah promised by Scripture since he died under a curse. Let's continue reading, and I'll go back and explain. The death of the Messiah alone might have been sufficient to cast doubt on the Christian message, as Saul himself testifies. Death in a manner cursed by Scripture, being hung on a tree, seems more than even Midrash could justify for most Jews. So what Paul is trying to do is embrace the accusation that Jesus was cursed, try to say that those who believe in him get that curse lifted off of themselves, but it leaves the curse on Jesus. So this midrash, whatever Paul's trying to do, could never justify Jesus's to be accepted by most Jews. So whatever Paul's strategy here is, it seems to be suitable to causing Jews to reject Christ. It may make Gentiles feel better who are dumb and don't know that a curse means you are going to hell unless somebody saves you. But Jesus isn't getting saved here; he's being cursed. And as long as he's cursed, the curse has been lifted from you, is what Paul's saying. So if Jesus ever had the curse removed from him, that would remove that would take the curse off of him, but leave there's no covering curse anymore for those who are cursed. If that's how you got a curse lifted. But this kind of lifting of curses is untrue. This is the way sorcerers work. They would lift curses. They'd use spells and whatever. So Paul is actually talking about a mystic pagan practice of lifting curses off people by pagan prayers. So this is craziness, and it's not possible. It's not like atonement where you die, an innocent animal dies, and that is deemed, or innocent crops and so on. Those are also atonements. Those are gifts you give to God that appease him. But a person who's been cursed and truly is cursed means that God has to turn his face away from that person forever. And that just makes no sense. But that would definitely fit the agenda of the Herodians, the people who would send in an infiltrator to destroy Christianity basically from within. By Paul, claimed to be a Jew, trying to talk to Jews somewhat, but his focus turns to Gentiles. And what he's going to do is use that platform to try to infiltrate and contaminate concepts that other Christians who are Gentile will repeat as talking points, which will destroy Christianity in the eyes of Jews. And that's Herod's aim. Herod doesn't really care how many people who are Gentile become a Christian, as long as they're spouting these type of lies. It's a lie that Jesus is a curse for us. So just so you know, that's impossible. If he did become a curse for us, he's not our savior, and that's it. And the Jews would know that, but the Gentiles would not know it. And it's a perfect kind of poison pill. So the Jewish people who are on the fence and don't know, and they hear that, oh, even the Christians are saying that Christ is a curse for us, and they're going to go, my gosh, how could that be? That can't be the Messiah. He's not going to go to heaven for anybody. He can't be there. He's cursed. That's the whole point of a curse. So anyway, I'm going to stop it there. That's just to give you a flavor of where we are, and we're going to pick up more on this book, the Operation Messiah. We're going to show you how it explains and justifies understanding that Paul was truly an Herodian infiltrator into the church to try to destroy it by causing a deflection of the Jews from continuing to grow and be more in support of Jesus as their king. And that would always be a rival, whether in death and in an ascended state, wouldn't matter. Herod Antipas and all the Herodian kings in the region of their different tetrarchies. They definitely do not want any rival kings such as Jesus to be gaining any affection away from themselves, any loyalty away from themselves, and then be a rival to them. So that's the whole point. They're going to contaminate the Jews' understanding of what Jesus meant by his death and burial is something other than what it really was. There is an atonement factor. That is clear, but Paul has turned it in Galatians into a curse, and that's a curse on Jesus because that's how he applied a passage from Deuteronomy, which didn't really apply to Jesus, but he applied it, and that's all that matters because we are dumb Gentiles, and we'll allow him to say that somebody who's hung on a tree includes someone who's nailed to a cross. That's not being hung; that's nailed to a cross. And that also implied in that context, they had to be guilty of the crime. So that was the point. But Jesus wasn't, so he wasn't cursed. You can't have an innocent person being cursed just because they're put on a tree. Do you see the point? So when God says anyone who's hung on a tree is cursed, is because they're guilty. So Paul's saying Jesus was cursed, which would mean he'd have to be a sinner to be in that situation under the law. It isn't true. Therefore, Paul has given the perfect cannon fodder to the Jews to reject Jesus. And Paul knows it, but you and I, being dumb Gentiles, have no clue what the subversive effect of those statements by Paul are. But this is being pointed out in this book, The Operation Messiah. All right, God bless. We'll catch up with you hopefully tomorrow and with another episode. Ciao, bye.